In this video, I'm going to provide you with a step-by-step guide for using Roam for qualitative research. Roam or Roam Research is a note-taking tool, as they describe, for networked thought. It's a very powerful tool that can be used for almost anything. A lot of people seem to be using it as a sort of second brain, as it's called. But for me, I'm using it primarily, or actually exclusively, for qualitative research. And when I started out using Roam a couple of years ago, there was no guidance on how to use Roam for qualitative data collection, coding, and analysis. And over very extensive use over the last 2 years, I've come to develop my own processes and workflows that work very well for me. And I thought I would share that with you, just in case you're deciding whether Roam is the right tool for you, or maybe you're already using Roam and you're looking for some tips, some hints, or to really get started in the qualitative data collection and analysis methodology. And rather than making it up as you go along, if I can help expedite that process by showing you how I do it, then that's great. I will also note that I am not a power user. I'm sure there are other people who could watch this video and give me some hints and tips as to what I could do to improve the efficiency and remove some of the redundancies that I inevitably have within my workflow. But I use Roam as an means to an end in terms of coding and analyzing qualitative data for my research. And as such, I haven't invested a huge amount of time in learning all of the tips and tricks that one probably could use. With that said, I think I've got a good workflow and I'd like to show you it today. So this video, I'm going to assume you have pretty basic or even no knowledge of Roam. This is a multiple video series so that it's not too overwhelmingly long. This first video is going to look at basic setup of your Roam graph, which we'll talk about in just a moment, and my interview workflow. I'm going to be doing this video in real time. I'm not going to pause and cut, so I'm going to enter text manually, primarily to show you exactly what I'm doing step by step. But of course, if it's too long-winded, if you're already familiar with Roam, you can always adjust the speed of the video playback, but of course you can skip through as well. So the first thing to note about Roam is when you first open your Roam graph or the platform, you're presented with this view here. This is your Roam graph. You can have a number of graphs. Each graph is considered a database, as it were. And I name my graph based on the project that I'm currently working on. So in this instance, this will be a demo graph. But if I'm conducting, let's say, research into workplace conflict, I might call it workplace conflict graph or whatever it might be. It's a way of organizing your projects, and I have one graph per project. Roam is organized primarily around daily notes. They are the sort of central backbone of the Roam system. Your graph, being this database, comprises of individual pages, and the default structure of these pages is a calendar. So every time you open Roam, today it's April the 16th, and so I'm presented with a page for today. Now this is designed so that you can quickly type in whatever you might want to capture for today's note. And a lot of people use it as a sort of daily note-taking tool. I'm not going to be using it like that, but I will be using these daily notes, which we'll come back to at a point later. The other thing just to mention is there's this note bar, this panel on the side, which I keep open almost all of the time as I'm working in Roam. And over the lifetime of a project, it will become increasingly populated with shortcuts to my most used pages. This, being a brand new graph that I've not used before, only has 2 pages. If I open the graph overview, I can see those 2 pages. One is the user, which is me, and the second is the page that is created automatically upon opening the graph, which is today. I haven't put in my name, so I'm known as anonymous here. The other way you can look at your pages in a more sort of systematic view is by using the All Pages tab. And this will show you every page that's been created and when they were last updated. And again, it only shows these two. So if I click on this link here, it will take me back to today. Of course, I can also do that by hitting to daily notes, and that will again take me back to the day that I am currently on. What I'm going to start with is some templates. The reason that I'm going to start with templates is because when you're doing qualitative data gathering and analysis, you end up using a lot of the same data formats and structure time and time again. And so rather than manually inputting that data, I create templates. This expedites the process quite substantially, but it also avoids the risk that I'm sort of idiosyncratically entering data not in a sort of standardized way. And that will really challenge finding that data later and also analyzing that data. So this is a way of really maintaining good structure. And that's one of the key principles for me of using Roam, is being very methodical about how I keep my data organized, especially when using large data sets where there's hundreds of interviews or observations that I want to keep track of. The way you create a template, in fact, the way you create any new page in Roam is you go up to the search bar in the top right. If a page already exists, by simply starting typing it, it will start finding it. So the only other page that exists is anonymous. So by typing AN, it will find that page. However, I don't want this page. I want to create a new page. So I'm going to create one called template pages. Now, template pages doesn't exist, so I get the option to create a new page, hit enter, and this is my new templates page. Every time you create a new page, it is a blank page, which starts with bullet points. Now, these bullet points are in Roam called blocks. I will refer to them interchangeably as bullets or blocks. If you hover over it, it will show you who created it and at what time and date, and that can be quite handy. But they're slightly more powerful than simple bullet points in, say, Word or any other sort of word formatting document. The reason being is if I want to create some text, so text, hit enter, and it adds a block below. That's pretty standard. But what Roam allows you to do is click into the block and add subsequent text underneath. So by hitting return, it generates a sub block which sits under the main block, and I can enter new text. Go again, new text. Go again, new text. You get the idea. Hitting tab indents further to create a new sub block. Shift and tab brings it back out. And this allows you to create infinitely deep layers to your text. So if I wanted to go into another block, I can click into this one and add more, and so forth. Clicking these links takes you back out, and so you can start getting an idea of how the text is structured. Now, I didn't need to click into the block to do what I just did. I could have stayed on the templates page, simply click tab, and you can see how these blocks have now been populated under my main block. So I've got all these sub blocks. So what I can simply do is hit enter and create new blocks directly underneath each other. Hitting tab brings them in. So I don't need to go into the block to add sub blocks. But it is useful sometimes as a way of keeping the screen clean. If you've got a lot going on, you can kind of zoom in and see what's going on further and further. And you can also quite powerfully collapse these blocks so that what you end up doing is simplifying the information. When you collapse a block, you know that there's more to it when it's got a dark circle around the outside. So again, you can clean up or keep your pages nice and neat by having these multiple layers that sort of allow you to cascade information further and further down if you need to. I don't want to enter just simple text here. What I want to do is go into the task of creating a template. The first template I'm going to start with is an interview template. So I'm going to do that by adding interview, and I'm copying this text from another document to keep it as quick as I can. Under the block interview, I'm going to tab in, and then I'm going to paste the next section of text that I want here. Now I'm going to show you something where if I click Command V, I'm on a Mac here, but Control V would be the same on a Windows computer. these are three sub blocks that I've now entered under my main block: keyword, which I'll discuss in a moment, participant, and date. What I want to capture when I create any new interview is, first of all, that it's an interview, which is what this keyword is here, who the participant is that I've interviewed, and the date that the interview is taken. Now, something important here is by hitting Control V, you can see that it's created a subblock for each individual line of text here. Now I'm going to undo that, and now I'm going to hit Shift Command V, and it's going to paste it all together under one subblock. That's a handy shortcut for keeping your data organized. So I like these three parts of my interview data to be kept under one subblock, and I'll explain why later. But I'm going to talk more about the shortcuts in a later video. This is just a handy one that's quite useful in the early days of using Roam. So I'm not going to enter any values for these, because every time I create a new interview, I will populate these fields with new data depending on what date the interview was taken and who the participant was. However, you'll notice that keyword is populated, and it's populated by the word interview in square brackets. And you'll also notice that the word keyword, participant, and date have double asterisks outside of them. The reason being, the double asterisk simply adds bold. It's a formatting font. So if I type the word test and then I type the same again with the asterisk, it becomes bold. This is an aesthetic thing. It's quite useful for showing what data you're referring to and keeping, again, things nice and organized. The double square bracket, on the other hand, is much more important. That creates a link to a page. Now, by creating a link to the page interview, what I'm doing here is every time I create an interview, I am linking the keyword interview to the new interview that I've created, so that when I search for interviews in the future, every single interview is tagged with the keyword, and therefore I can find them nice and easily. And as I go through this demo, I will show you exactly how that works in principle. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, but there is no interview page. Well, the powerful thing about Roam is by simply creating a link to a page, if the page doesn't already exist, I'll have just generated the page. So if I go into my all pages now, there is a page called interview. Go back to where I was, and you can see that, go back to where I was, and you can see that I have essentially created a new page in the process, and I'll explore that page in just a moment. So the next thing I want to add is a summary. Command B acts as the bold. So what I've created is how I want every interview to be organized. So when I create a new interview, I'm going to use this template here to start the interview off, to start the page off, so that I entered these fields and I know that my data is structured nice and neatly. The way I now map this to becoming a template that I can use in the future is I simply add the following tag to my the block that is the parent block, as it's called, to these subblocks. I'll show you how this works in practice. If I want to create a new interview, for now I'll just call it interview 1. I start with a blank page, but I want to make sure that I have that correct structure. So I simply hit semicolon twice, and that brings up all of my templates. I have only one template at the moment, which is the interview template. And by clicking that, it then populates the page with the form, the data structure that I like all of my interviews to take. I can then add a participant name, let's say Joe. I can add a date. I can add my summary, my notes, and my transcript to this interview page. And I know that then if I create another interview in the future, I have the same structure for each interview. The reason for tagging it with the word interview is if I just quickly create a second interview, interview 2, you'll notice that I hit enter then before the 2 had registered in the title of the new page. So you can equally change titles of pages by changing them up here as well. It's as simple as that. If I again bring in my template, this participant is Jack. If I go to my interview page, I now have linked references. So Roam is incredibly powerful when you start using links, because every time you use a link in a page, it will automatically populate each page with the linked references. So this means that it's really easy to find any links across your pages. And links in Roam are bidirectional, which means they link forward and backwards, allowing you to move backwards and forwards between pages very quickly and efficiently. So the interview page, as you'll notice, is empty. I haven't entered anything into the first block within the interview page. Regardless, I've now linked across my interviews. So in the future, if I want to come back and find any interviews, I know where they're organized. And now you can start seeing why I use this keyword within my data structure. So what I'm going to do quickly is I'm going to go and I'm going to delete these 2 pages. And instead, I'm going to go back to my template pages. I'm going to create 2 new templates very quickly. In fact, I'm going to create 3 templates very quickly. I'm going to create a participant template. Again, the way I'm creating these templates are particular to me. These come from sort of my experience of the most effective organization of my data. However, this is entirely unique to my workflow. And if you find something that works more effectively for you, of course, that's ideal. So what I'm adding here is a participant template, a document template, and I'm going to add a meeting template as well. But with my meetings, there might be multiple types of meetings. So in this example, as you can see, I'm relying on interview data. I'll be relying on archival document data, and I'm going to be relying on meeting observations as well. In this fictional scenario, there's going to be a couple of different types of meetings. There's going to be union meetings. There's going to be Southwestern, division, and there's going to be a board meeting division. Board meeting template. And you can immediately start seeing why this is useful. If you regularly observe meetings and each meeting has its own style, has regular attendees, has groups of people who or an agenda that remains relatively similar, you can create templates for each of those, so you're not constantly having to type and retype the same things, but you can pre-populate pages essentially. So just to briefly explain the participant and the document templates that I've created, let me just quickly add my board meeting template, and then I'll have finished them all off and I can get on with the explanation. Participant template simply works by, again, first of all, adding the keyword, the tag, that ensures that I can always find participants in the future. So any field, any page that has this template drawn into it will immediately be linked to the newly created participant page. In this example, because I'm looking at an organization, I'm interested in what role they have, whether they're the CEO or a CFO or whatever it might be. I'm also interested in the location of this individual. Let's say, as I've sort of suggested within my meetings, there's a Southwestern division. There might be a Easterly division. It doesn't matter. The point being, I'm interested in this example in the location of that individual. I tend to use a snowballing technique as a means of contacting other individuals to participate in my research, and therefore I often like to know who they've been referred by, and that quite quickly provide some contextual information which will inform the conversation that I'm going to have with this person. And there's often a specific reason for contacting someone. So maybe they've had a key role in something, maybe they've been referred because they are someone who has a good understanding of a certain topic, whatever it might be. I can then also add that into this initial participant data field. I can make notes. Notes might include for me things like certain areas of expertise that this person has that I'm particularly interested in, something that someone else in a previous interview has mentioned about this person. I might put it into these notes so that when I then speak to that person, I can bring that up. And of course, there will be the questions that I'm interested in asking this participant when it comes to interviewing them. Under the documents template, what I have here is the way in which I store archival data. So I'm interested, again, of course, first of all, tagging it as a document so I can find it later. I'm interested in the source of that document. Where did it come from? Did I find it online? Was it sent to me by someone? Was it in an email? Was it anywhere? I'm interested in keeping track of that source. And I often provide a short description of that document as well, as a means of reminding myself when I don't know the immediately recognize the title of the document, what it contains. Sometimes there's a source document that will allow me to have found this new document, and sometimes I will include that. Often I will add a date produced, a date accessed, and any other additional details. And under the meetings, when I make meeting observations, the first thing to note is, again, I'm tagging it as a meeting, but what I'm also doing here is tagging it with a second link, which is board meeting, which refers to the meeting type. The point here is to show you that you can have infinite tags, you can have infinite different levels of your sort of organization of your data. I didn't necessarily need to have these as two separate lines. I could have simply put them together like this, but for me, I like having them as separate sort of sub levels so that I know that it's nice and organized, and it again just means I can keep track of my data nice and neatly. Of course, when I attend a meeting to make an observation, I'm going to want to record the date that meeting occurred on. I like to include who the attendees are, and of course I'm going to be making notes during the observation, and therefore that's what the notes field is for. One thing you'll notice that's missing from all of these templates is the title. So for example, the participant, who's the name, who is the participant, what's their name? Similarly, what's the name of the document that's being referred to here? The reason for that is every time you create a new participant, that will become a new page, and it's the title of the page that will be the name of the participant. It will be the title of the page that will be the name of the document. So let's see that in action. What I'm going to do, and just to mention again, this link here is vital that you add it after each template, and it's the way that you find those templates when you subsequently later double tap the semicolon. Now you can see by doing it, I've created tags to each of the different templates that I've created. Of course, if I was to remove these templates because I haven't actually created them yet, if I then do it again, you'll see it's changed subsequently. And if you don't see one there, then you can. Interestingly enough, my board meeting isn't showing up. and I believe it's because it is a child node. Oh, no, it's because I didn't put an S on the end. So that's quite a good example of how sort of specific you have to be with your use of correct links. So again, now if I do it properly, I get the correct template brought in. So again, that was just a missing of an S, failed to link this appropriately. This tag here, the hashtag Rome/templates, is Rome's own sort of internal code that allows it to be used as templates. You can't choose this tag. This tag is sort of set by the Rome platform as a way of linking anything that you type underneath it as a child node to the template. And the template title will be the text that comes before that tag. Just something to mention at this stage. It's a bit of a random one, and I'll talk about it a little bit more later, but the use of a hash and the use of the square brackets does exactly the same thing in Rome, technically. The only difference is aesthetics. So if I was to type the square brackets around this instead of a hash, it would do the same thing. Similarly, instead of meeting here, let me just demonstrate. If I click meeting, it's going to take me to the meeting page. If I go back, if I change this so that it's no longer in square brackets, but it's in a hash, if I click that, it still takes me to the meeting page. Primarily then, it's an aesthetics thing, and I'll explain how I use that differently later. I primarily keep all links as square brackets, and I use the hash for coding later when I start analyzing my data, and that just keeps things really nice and clean. However, you will find that if you're putting spaces in the names of pages, it's definitely better to use square brackets because it allows you to create that space, whereas if you're using a hash and you create a space after it, it immediately ends the name, and so it becomes more challenging to do. So as I say, they do the same thing, but for me, square brackets is the default for creating links, and hashes are used almost exclusively for coding my data later. Okay, so now I've created template pages. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how I then subsequently add a participant. So I'm going to create a new participant by simply adding their name as the page. In this example, I've got a fictional name, Naira Venera. I enter that, and of course, Naira Venera as a page doesn't exist in this graph, so I've created a new page. The first thing I'm going to do when I create a new participant is I'm going to create the interview template, the participant template, and it's going to populate that page with the template that I've just created. In this example, Naira is the CEO. She's located in the headquarters. She was not referred to me by anyone. Reason for contact is to discuss strategic oversight. She has only 15 minutes to speak. And under questions, I'm going to then populate this with some random questions. So if I was to speak to Naira later today, I immediately have in front of me some of the key information that I need when I'm having that conversation. I know who she is. I know that her role, where she's located. I know if she was referred to me by someone else, who she might have been referred to me by. The reason for my conversation with her, any notes that might be important or pertinent to the conversation, and the questions that I want to ask. One thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to go back up to this initial set of data. I'm going to highlight it and I'm going to double square bracket it. The reason for doing that is that then creates a link. And as we know, that creates a page. So headquarters is now a page in its own right. Now, this is useful if you do research which is locationally relevant. Suddenly, I have a link to a geographical location, and I can add whatever notes I want about the headquarters. So located in Dallas, open 9 till 6 p.m., whatever it might be. You can also, of course, add, as many notes as you want. You could create your own template for when you have geographical locations, whatever it might be. But suddenly you can start seeing how these pages can be useful, because if I've got lots of random locations, by linking them, I can quickly go to that location and remind myself of the information about it. And this is what I mean by the bi-directional links. By having added in the headquarters link to Naira's page, it also will tell me at the bottom here that there's a linked reference to Naira, which will remind me, if I'm looking at this headquarters page later, that Naira is located in the headquarters. Now, when I created the template for participant, you'll remember that I put those 3 different lines under the first block. And this is a good example of exactly why I do that. When I see an individual's name, a participant's name in my data set, I want to know a few key things without having to click into that page to look at them. I want to know, first of all, who it is. So in this instance, it's a participant, but it could also be a fellow researcher or any other tag. That is vital to be included in any block that you want to show up elsewhere. So I put that at the start. Any individual or participant that I'm interested in interviewing, because this is a fictional organizational study, I want to know their role, because that will probably prompt me as to who they are. And so that's why this sits under here. And again, the location for me, because I do relatively location specific research, sits under this first block. Now, if you are also interested in anything else that might be interesting for you, you can add it under this block as well. And this is where Roam becomes really powerful. If I click into it on this page here, I can actually change it on Naira's page. So by clicking back onto Naira, you'll see the word test has been added to her page. As you can imagine, this is really, really helpful for avoiding this situation where you've copied and pasted text all over the place like you would in Word or in other platforms, and you can't then change it without going back to the original source, and you end up with sort of version error, massive amounts of duplication. You don't have to worry about with any of that with Roam. Okay, so I've created Naira. I'm going to very quickly then populate this with 2 more participants, which will just help with the examples later. So the next person is going to be someone called Arthur Briggs. I'm going to pull in, as per normal, the participant template. This is the CFO. He's also in the headquarters. And again, by doing that, if I click on the headquarters, I'll see that Arthur and Naira now sit under there. Referred to be by Naira. Now, by doing this, I've linked Naira with Arthur, and I'll show you that in just a moment. Reason for contact, to discuss the financial situation of the organization. Any notes? As an example, I might add, previously worked at Inside Tech as an accountant. And for questions, again, I would put whatever questions were pertinent here. There is a quicker way to add questions, and I will show you that slightly later. Especially when you're asking the same questions of multiple people. And as you might imagine, it draws upon using templates. Finally, then, the last person that I want to add is Sonna Paul. Create a page for Sonna. And you can see how templates speed up the process of inputting data in this process. For the role for Sonna, I've put her as an accountant, but I've also included that she's a union rep. And in doing so, again, I've tagged that. Again, just as an example, I could tag anything I wanted to with a link. I could have linked an accountant as well if I'd fancied. In this example, I want to just put in the fact that she's a union rep because I want to interview lots of union reps. And so knowing that she's a union rep allows me to pull through. If I click the union rep page in the future, I'll be able to see all of the different reps that I've interviewed. Location is going to be the Southwest Division. Referred by Paul and Nat, who we haven't met yet. And again, by doing so, I've created a new page for Paul. Reason for talking to Sonna. just to build on my fictional narrative. She was a key activist in the union drive in 2021. And the questions that I might ask are as follows. So in doing this, you can start seeing how I'm creating lots of links. I've created a page for Paul. Now I know when I see Paul under this unlinked, again, I could add, I'm not going to, but I could add participant information to Paul. But I can see that every time I go into Paul, who he referred me to, etc., etc. If I go to the participant page, you can start seeing all of the participants and it starts pulling all of this together. Now, I've also got the template page under here because, of course, the template contains the link. You can use the filter and you can actually filter out templates so that it doesn't show these anymore. So you can either include them or you can remove them you can exclude them by shift clicking. So that they no longer show up. So it keeps it really nice and organized. So I now know that in my database, I have 4 participants. And with a very quick sort of shot, I can see exactly who's who. And again, the power of Roam is allowing me to add data from basically any page. So now that I've got all of this data entered, I have this participant page, which is automatically populated for me. But I can also add, I could also want to just focus quickly on unlinked references. So we saw linked references is when you have specifically added the keyword to a page. Of course, it doesn't need to be called a keyword. You can literally add it in the middle of a text. So you can put this on any sort of line or in the middle of a sentence, it doesn't matter, but I use them as keywords here to sort of organize my data. But another key element to Roam is it will also search for the word and add it as an unlinked reference. So anytime you use the word participant in any page, it will find that and pull it in here. So on some of my data, some of my graphs with vast data sets, I might have 1,000 unlinked references to a page titled work because I use the word work in a huge amount of notes that I make. And so every instance of the word work is suddenly populated and organized together for me to find later, which is incredibly powerful. Now, just again, to show you a little helpful tip here, participant is one of those pages that I'm going to come back to time and time again. So I'm going to add it to my shortcuts. Here it is on the side. And what I actually do to keep things really visible for me is I add an emoji for my key data field. So whatever that might be, for me, generally, it's something in the region of a very boring image like that. But by doing so, what it does is it means it immediately helps me notice, find, I should say, that link if I need it in the future. And if I'm looking at lots of data, I immediately, if I see this icon, I know that it's a participant. Really, again, powerful thing about Roam is if you change the title of a page, it updates all of your links automatically. You'll have seen these 4 links here are now populated with the type with this new page name, including the emoji. It doesn't break those links. I could change the title of this page as many times as I wanted to, and all of these links would remain the same. So there's no risk that I'm going to break anything that I've already done. So if I now go back to Sonna Paul, you'll see that Sonna's got this new emoji in here. Similarly, under Union Rep, I could do the same thing. Southwest Division, I could do the same thing, etc., etc. So if you want to change the names of pages, it's really useful in sort of keeping track of what's going on. So having created all of these templates, having created these participants, I'm now going to undertake an interview. I'm going to undertake an interview with Sonna. So I generally, this is my workflow, this works for me. I start in the participant page that I've already created. I've got these 4 questions that I've already pre-written, whatever they might be, for Sonna, and now I'm going to have a conversation with her. During this conversation, I will ask, of course, these questions, and I will simply answer them by creating a block underneath the question block. So to do this and to help show this example, I am going to just pop some lorem ipsum into these just to show you what that would look like. Now, let's say in the interview that I have with Sona, I get to ask 3 of my 4 questions. I didn't have time to address the 4th, and that's absolutely fine. Let me show you how I organize this data subsequently. Of course, this is now sitting under the participant page, not under any interview page. So what I want to do is create an interview specifically for Sona's interview. The reason that I undertook the interview by looking at the participant page is, remember, I've got all of these contextual pieces of information that sit on this page. So I might have had, tons and tons of notes here about who this person was and the reason for my conversation with them and the questions that I wanted to ask. Now, if I took that to a blank interview page, I lose all of that information. So I keep it nice and neat by conducting the interview looking at this page. But once the interview's finished, I then want to keep this page as the participant page, and I want to keep the interview separate to make sure that I can find that interview later. The participant is sort of this rolling entity that I might interview multiple times, but the interview page is, from my perspective, considered static. It's this thing that I've conducted at a moment in time. So to create the interview page, I create them with quite specific titles. And again, this structure works for me. So the first thing I do is I type interview in square brackets as the page title. I then provide the number of the interview. So this is the first interview, so it's going to be interview 1. Again, I add square brackets and I type the interviewee's name. So in this case, Sona Paul. Close those square brackets. And this is my first interview with Sona Paul, so I add a 1 after that as well. What I'm creating here is a page that immediately, by looking at just the title, I know it's an interview. I know it's the first interview I conducted. I know the participant who I conducted the interview with, and I know which interview of potentially many I had with this individual. So with Sona, I know that this is my first interview with Sona, and actually I know it's my first interview overall. So that's quite useful. And again, it links this page to both Sona Paul. So if I click at Sona Paul, I can go and immediately see underneath the linked reference to the interview. So in the future, if I have a lapse of memory and I forget how many conversations I've had with Sona, if I've had 7, if I've had 10, or if I've had none, I will immediately know how many interviews I've conducted. And if I go back to this, I can then populate this with my template. Now, we created the interview template. Here's where I have some redundancy. I have some redundancy that other people might not like by adding Sona Paul's name to this top field. And I do this so that I know when I pull this in that I have her name sorted at the top of the field. I like having it in both the title so I can find it in a list, but also in the initial block. Personal preference, and there's no correct way to do this. Of course, for me, the other vital element is the date. Now, there's a couple of ways to do this. You can use the date picker. You can use /date picker to do that, and that will allow you to choose the date that it occurred on. You can also enter it manually by using square brackets and typing in the date. So, for example, if I wanted it to be today, it would have pre-populated, but if it was actually yesterday, I could have done this, and there's the suggested date, and if I click that, it will create a page for that date. I want to show you just quickly one thing that I think is really handy. If it's today, you hit / and type today, hit enter, and there's your date. And in doing so, again, the power of the links here. If I look at my daily notes, I know that my interview was conducted today, and here it is. It sits within those daily notes. And this sort of acts as a calendar. And if I had days and days or months or years of data, I can scroll back through and find exactly where each interview took place on that calendar. And that just is useful for sort of a temporal reflection on when you have huge amounts of interview or observational data, and you're sort of trying to piece back together your sort of patchy memory of what was going on. This is where this is quite useful. And for me, I sometimes undertake multiple interviews or multiple observations in a day. So again, it would just stack underneath here really neatly, and I would be able to see, oh, okay, that was the day that I did 3 interviews and was also on site making observations. So just briefly, to look at all pages, you can start seeing how these pages build up. And what's really interesting and useful is you can see not only the word count, the date that these pages were created and updated, but the number of mentions. And by mentions, that's the number of links. And by clicking here, I can see references that use both linked and unlinked referrals to Sonopool. Again, very, very handy. Now, what you saw happen on the side here is another very powerful and useful feature of Roam, the sidebar. And what this allows is for you to have two pages open at any one time. So no longer have you got to battle around multiple tabs and multiple things going on. It's all done in one screen using tabs. Now, I should mention, and probably should have mentioned at the beginning, that I'm using Roam's desktop app because it's, for me, more stable and slightly cleaner than using it on Chrome or anything else. But of course, this all functions exactly the same way on Chrome or on your web browser. So I'm going to show you the power of this right sidebar in just a second. So let me go back into the interview that I've just conducted. Here it is at the top here. It's the most recently created. I have a summary keyword here that for me, I could put in whatever I wanted to. I quite often basically add a 1 or 2 lines note that will remind me of what happened in that conversation. So in this instance, if you'll remember, if I open Sonia's tab, that she was a key activist in the union drive in this fictional scenario. And so when I had this conversation with Sonia, it was a really interesting conversation about unionization. And I've made a note to listen to 10 minutes and 12 seconds in for comments on the regional conflict. Under notes, this is where the sidebar comes in handy. So at the moment, the sidebar is empty. The way in which you use the sidebar is you use shift and click, and anything you click will then open up in that sidebar. Now you can open as much as you want in that sidebar and they all stack on top of each other, which becomes incredibly useful for searching out things as you're going along. I open this sidebar because suddenly we want to pull the answers that Sonia gave me into the interview that we undertook. And this is where we transfer, as I say, from this sort of rolling entity of Sonia being a person that I might conduct multiple interviews with to a fixed interview at a moment in time. So I'm simply going to copy the questions that I was able to ask. I didn't get the chance to ask my 4th question, but I did get the chance to ask these 3. And I'm going to simply cut them and paste them into my interview. And in doing so, I sort of fix these questions in this moment of time and clean up Sonopool's page. I no longer need these questions underneath her in her participant page. I could keep them there if I wanted to, but I like to keep them in the interview page exclusively. I leave question 4 in there because I might want to come back to that later if I speak to her in, say, a follow-up interview. And then I might also want to add some follow-up questions based on the interview I had and the inability to ask all of the questions. Again, under notes, I might want to take some of the notes, some of the thoughts that I had from this interview and add them in here. Let me just say something now, which is, again, a very powerful tool in Roam, and I've saved it to now because it adds to the complexity somewhat of the Roam platform. As you know, these bullet points are called blocks, and as I've said before, they are more than simply a bullet point. They are sort of this container of text. Each block has its own shortcut. Each block has a link that exists sort of secretly that you can access. Under my notes, I might want to make reference to the fact that in a previous conversation, I had a really interesting conversation about unionization. If that's something that I want to add, I can simply right-click on the node and copy the block reference, or you can do it with Command-Shift-C. Over here, then, I can simply paste that block reference, which comes up as this sort of double bracketed weird combination of text. But by clicking off that, it suddenly inputs the text into this. It copies the text across, but it doesn't just copy the text across. It copies a live version of it across. So if I want to add more comments to this, follow up about new union drive, it adds this text to the block reference. So again, if I just click this, it's simply a link that's copying, sort of live copying the text across. Now in Roam, there's a number of different things you can do with this. You can keep it as a sort of unidirectional copying of text. But if you right click here, if you right click, if you click the copied text, you can actually replace it with a number of different things. I'm not going to go into them all in detail, but if you copy the original, you can essentially swap the blocks. And by doing so, this now becomes the copied text and this becomes the original. Similarly, if I swap them back, another one that's really powerful is embedding. And by embedding it, what I actually do is I create essentially two forms of the same thing, which will update in both ways. So if I add, for example, a exclamation mark here, it will add an exclamation mark here. But now I can also remove the exclamation mark there. So it allows sort of a live updating in both ways. So embedding is a really handy way of making sure that you're not having, any duplication unnecessarily, and everything is consistent. You haven't got version errors of notes in one place that don't match notes in another place. You'll also notice that there's a little one that appears in your anytime you create a reference elsewhere in your Roam, and by clicking that you can immediately be shown where that's copied across to. So if you've referenced the same piece of information in multiple points, you can then immediately see where have I used that or copied that to later. Now, if you use your imagination for a moment, you can start thinking about the possibilities of copying pieces of text from interviews, from observations, and referencing it in multiple places as you start coding your data. And you can start seeing the power of using references to use the same piece of data in multiple points and coding it in multiple different ways without sort of affecting the original data. Or by updating the original data, you can then change it in multiple points rather than, the static nature of Word documents where if you copy and paste text, if you edit the copied text, it doesn't edit the pasted text, etc., etc. So this is a really, really powerful tool. So here I'm showing you not only the role of the sidebar, which I should note is nice and adjustable, but also the role of references and the ability to copy nodes. Now you can copy just the node, you can copy, sorry, not the node, the block. You can copy the block and its children blocks as well. So you have a huge amount of sort of availability in terms of how you're using Roam here. And again, this is why it's quite daunting to use because it's such a powerful tool. But as soon as you start getting to grips with this, you can start understanding some of the value in this flexibility. So the last thing I want to do just quickly on this interview page is I want to enter the transcript. Now, let's imagine I haven't made the transcript yet, but I need to remind myself to do so. Again, I'm just showing you my workflow, what works for me. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to add myself a to-do task. Now, there's a couple of ways of creating to-do tasks. You can do it the slow way by manually typing, or you can click Command on a Mac, Command Enter to create a to-do, or you can do it through the menu option as well. I always use shortcuts as much as I can. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a child node. The child node is then going to be turned into a to-do, and I'm going to remind myself to add transcript. By clicking off that, suddenly you get a tick box, and if you tick it, the to-do is completed, and if you leave it unticked, it's of course left to do. The reason for this is if I open up the newly created to-do page, I didn't need to create this, it was created by Roam. And if I shift click so that it opens on the right hand side, you won't see anything in the page, but if I want to see the references that sit within this, here it is. My task is to add a transcript into the Sonar Pool page. So I know that if I have multiple to-dos, I can simply go to my to-do page. And in fact, I'll show you more clearly on the main page. If I go into my to-do, here it is. I know that in the page, interview one, Sonopool one, I need to add the transcript, and I can immediately click through and see that. And that's just a really handy way of keeping track of all the different jobs that I might have to do, especially because I'm really good at not doing the tasks that I don't like doing, like, for example, cleaning up and adding transcripts. So we've got an interview. We've got an interview page. And now we can see what this looks like. So again, if I filter and just remove the templates page, oops, wrong one. There we go. All of my interviews are now visible. Of course, I only have one, but as you can imagine, as soon as I start having more interviews, this will populate. Now, again, from my perspective and having done this a lot, I don't like, in a lot of pages, I'm happy to leave these as linked references. So if I go into my participants page, I'm happy to leave these as sort of disorganized in some ways linked references. They sit there, they're not in alphabetical order, but they just exist in this page, and I can always come back and find them. In my interview page, because there's a temporal order to my interviews, I don't like leaving them as sort of disorganized linked references. So what I actually do is I bring in my interviews, I add them to the interview page. So in this instance, I will create a link to the Sonopool interview here. And if I was to conduct multiple interviews, and again, I'm just going to copy this to save time. It would start building out to look like this. Now you'll notice there's a lot of square brackets going on, and that's because there's links inside links. But this is, again, for me, just the way I like to structure my data, and it means that I've got Sonopool there in the title, and by having it as a link rather than text, it means that should later I want to change the name of Sonopool, let's say I want to anonymize my data and Sonopool is no longer Sonopool, and I change them to participant 132. All of a sudden, everywhere that this data is stored, Sonopool's name disappears and it becomes participant 132. So if I go back into that good old interview page, here we go. The first interview I did was with participant 132. Again, I like adding links where I can because it just makes sure that all of my data is kept nice and structured. If I go back into here, again, participant 132, just to keep it nice and simple, I'll return it to what it was. So there we go. That's why I add all these links. It's why there's all these square brackets. And the reason, as I say, that I add them all here manually one by one is so that I have a really nice sort of temporal structure to my data. And I know exactly which interview was conducted at which time. Now, again, another thing you might want to do is add the date that the interview is taken here. You could pull that through as well if you wanted to by using, for example, a block reference. And just to show you what that might look like. If I wanted this block, for example, to sit on this page, I could simply copy the block reference, paste the block reference, and then I know exactly, again, that it was an interview, that it was done with Sonopool, that what the date was. I don't do that simply because I've got a lot of that information up here. It's just a personal choice of what information you want to sort of pull through at any point in time and how you want to structure it in your database or in your graph. So I'll just, again, show you, if I go back to the daily notes, you can see that the interviews organized here. If I had multiple interviews, they'd all stack nicely. The last thing I want to show you then very briefly is I mentioned earlier on that there is an easier way to organize your interview questions, especially if you're asking the same questions from multiple people. So the way I do this is I don't actually use the templates feature. I sort of do templates for interview questions manually, and I'll show you why. So I'm going to create a template page for shareholder questions. I'm going to create a template page for shareholder questions. These are questions that I know every time I speak to this company's shareholders, I'm going to ask them similar questions. And so rather than manually typing out the questions every time I create a new page, I want to be able to copy them from somewhere. So this is my new page. I've actually unnecessarily created a page inside a page here, so I'm actually going to delete this one. And just to refer to explain what I'm doing here, I pasted in square brackets into the new page, and the new page automatically creates square brackets. So what I've done here is created a page in a page, which I didn't need to do. Whereas this is absolutely fine. So default shareholder questions. I'm going to create, again, another one. And again, this time I'll carefully not use square brackets when I create the new page. So default union member questions. So again, I'm going to be speaking to union members, and so there's some questions that I want to ask them. And there's some default executive employee questions that I'm interested in asking. So every time I speak to anyone in the C-suite, what might I ask them? Let me just copy in some questions. And populate this page as an example. So if I speak to executive employees, I might ask them what their relationship is like with stakeholders, etc., etc., etc. I'm then going to create a template interview questions page. Now, there's a couple of things you could do here. I've created a couple of different pages. There's default union, default shareholder, and default executive questions. What I could do is at the beginning of each page, I could simply tag the page with, or link, I should say, the page to this template interview questions that I've just created, so that if I go in here, I can find them later. Or you could simply create the link in here and put default union, default shareholder, default executive. And then if I, in the future, want my default interview questions again, I add them to my shortcuts. And so if I'm somewhere else in my graph and I want to remind myself of the template questions, I go in here, I find all the different templates that I've got. I'm going to speak to an executive employee later today. And so all of a sudden I can take myself into this page. Remember, I don't need that anymore. And I have the questions that I might want to ask. So let's say I am going to speak to Naira. Now you might remember, but Naira is the CEO. So I'm going to open up Naira, and I have already created in my example the interview with Naira that I want to have. Now I've created this in advance. I haven't had the interview with Naira. I haven't had the second interview with Sona or the interview with Arthur yet. What I've done is I know that these interviews are coming up, so I've pre-populated. So if I open up Naira's page for just a moment, I have some questions that I want to ask her. But what I've got now is some template interview questions. So if I want to open these up, again, holding the shift key, I open it in the sidebar, close down all the other pages that I previously opened, which are sort of saved in your sidebar. And I'm specifically interested in these default executive employee questions that I'd created. So again, I open up that, and here we have the questions that I wanted to ask. Now, what's powerful about this all of a sudden is that I can copy these questions, I can paste them, and I'm just going to show you one sort of additional functionality to Roam, which we haven't yet covered. So if I copy the block references, which you should be familiar with now, I can paste those block references. So these are now links. If I answer these questions, so I'm having the interview with Naira and the answers are whatever they are. Making sure that they answers are child nodes under the, or child blocks under the blocks. I have my answers in here. Now you'll notice that again, I've got these references. This is really helpful when you come to later on in your data analysis. Reason being, if I then have another conversation with Arthur Briggs, And Arthur Briggs was the CFO. So again, he's going to have some executive employee questions. Copying the block references, and these are the questions again that I want to ask him. So I'm asking the same questions to the two people. I get answers from Arthur, which might be the same, might differ from those that I've previously received. Pop them in here. Again, you'll see that number populates to 2 because I've now got these questions referenced in 2 different places. Why is this helpful? Because if I go into the default executive questions, I'm showing you on the main page just to keep it nice and clean. What I'm able to do is open this up and see who answered what and how. So all of a sudden, everyone who's answered the same question will have the answers organized nice and neatly. Now, later when it comes to analysis, I'm not going to keep those answers in my default executive employee questions page. I might copy these out into into new pages that I'll create for my analysis, but it becomes incredibly helpful for finding answers and organizing those answers and comparing answers between multiple participants. Similarly, you can imagine how if I'm making observations, if you're tagging your observations in the same way, you can look at how observations compare over time. You can start building up a sort of temporal perspective, looking at processes and practices and change over time, which again, really useful and very, very hard to do, certainly from what I've done in the past in other tools. So just to keep myself nice and consistent, I want to go back to see to Naira's page. And just to explain what I did there, if you click any of the sort of links within these references, it will expand it open and show you the context in which the answer was given, or essentially the parent nodes, the parent blocks in which the block that I was looking for was situated. But essentially what that does is provides all the context around the answer that I was specifically looking for, which again, just super, super useful in terms of helping understand what's going on without having to leave this page. I'm sort of, oh, Naira mentioned this, but I can't remember what the previous question I asked Naira was. Well, if I click there, suddenly I can see what the previous question that I asked Naira was, which might help me understand this answer a little bit better. So let me just go to the Naira page, and in the essence of being consistent and of being organized, what I don't want to have is these questions sitting in Naira's participant page. What I want to have them in is the interview page. Now we've already created that interview page. So if I start typing interview, it populates these. I could also type in Naira and it would start populating. The search is really helpful in that sense. Shift clicks, opening it in the sidebar, and as I've mentioned, it will keep all of the things that you had previously open, sort of open in that sidebar hidden. I don't need this anymore, but what I do want is this. So I'm going to take these questions, I'm going to cut them, I'm going to paste them, and by doing so, it doesn't break these links. These links still exist, so I haven't done any damage. But what I have done is moved it across and kept this clean so that if I have new questions for Naira in the future, whatever they might be, I can pop them in here. And again, it just keeps things really nice and organized. Same for Arthur. So I had this interview with Arthur, but I haven't populated his interview page. So what I'm going to do is open that one up. And in the sidebar again, I'm going to open up his interview page, and I'm going to take his answers across. Again, as I've said, you could copy that all across as a block reference. You can have references inside references. You can move things around as much as you want. So for example, if I wanted to, just again to show you how powerful this is, if I want to copy the block references and paste them in here, I've suddenly created links within links, which is a way of, again, keeping track of organization. And it's a way of sort of, maintaining all of my data in as many places as possible. As I say, don't like doing this. Reason being, it gets very complicated. Things get referenced across too many places and I lose sort of track of what's going on, which is why I keep things nice and neat by simply cutting the data from the participant page and adding it to the interview page. Now, what I haven't done here, and anyone who's observant might notice, is I haven't added the template to the start of the page. So what I really should have done is added my interview. It would have been today. The summary, good. Note are these bits here. And again, my transcript might be a to-do. I won't bore you with doing the next one for Naira. You get the idea of what we're doing here. And through this process, you essentially have a really neat, systematic way of organizing your data. So you have your participants, you have your interviews with those participants, you might have job roles, or you could have anything you want, any sort of categorization you might think of, gender or age or I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but you get the idea. I've got location. One thing I might want to do is add a location location page. You'll notice that that's something that I haven't done. So here I've got now a location page that I've created. Let's bookmark that because I'm going to come back to that later. In the unlinked references, all of a sudden, anytime the word location appears, it's an unlinked reference, and you can see how quickly that builds up. Under the linked references, though, you'll notice I haven't got any. So what I might want to do is create a link reference. Well, headquarters, this is a location. So I quickly come in here and add the location label. And then I have Southwest Division, and that's also a location. And all of a sudden, if I go into location, I have my linked references. Southwest Division and headquarters are now both locations. And of course, I can make my own notes. So I can say unionized in 2021, led by Sonia Paul. Okay. So what I've tried to do is give you a brief, and I say brief, a long-winded overview of how I use Roam, specifically these graphs, to organize my data in a way that keeps it nice and neat, and is a workflow that really sort of works for me in terms of managing this data. This process is incredibly idiosyncratic. You can use Roam however you want, but I hope by giving you this insight, just a simple sort of templates, structures, the way I move data around, the use of referencing blocks, child blocks and these sorts of things and tags, help you get an idea of how to use Roam for yourself. I hope this has been useful. I hope you've listened to it in double time speed. And I'm going to create a video following this one that looks at, for example, adding documents, making observational data inputs, using daily notes a bit better, organizing your ideas, and shortcuts for working with Roam to be a little bit more efficient. But for now, thank you very much for watching this video.